Ми заїжджаємо туди, куди машиною, нереально заїхати і вивезти.
The most dangerous moment in modern war is not the assault, it's not the breakthrough, it's the moment right after. When someone is bleeding, the radio goes urgent, and the battlefield suddenly becomes predictable. Soldiers cluster without thinking about it. A vehicle appears where vehicles always appear. Routes get reused because routes always get reused. In that moment, the enemy doesn't need to guess what comes next, because every army on Earth reacts the same way. Evacuation. For decades, armies treated this as a fixed cost of war. You fight, people get hit, and then you pay the price pulling them out. Medics die. Rescue vehicles get hunted. The rescue becomes its own battle. That was considered unavoidable. Russia understood that better than almost anyone. And in Ukraine, it turned evacuation into a pressure lever. Not random cruelty, not chaos. A deliberate trap built into the rhythm of combat. Because if you can make evacuation feel impossible, you don't just kill soldiers. You slow entire units. You delay commanders. You drain morale quietly. You teach everyone that the real danger isn't pushing forward. It's what happens if someone gets hit. That is how attrition breaks armies without headline offensives. And then Ukraine did something Russia did not plan for. Ukraine didn't just try to make evacuation safer. It tried to make evacuation disappear. Not in a science fiction way, not with magic technology. By removing the human signal Russia's drone doctrine relies on. That's why this matters, because this isn't a story about one gadget. It's a story about how Ukraine found a way to erase one of Russia's most reliable killing windows from the battlefield. Russia's pressure model in Ukraine hasn't been about brilliance. It's been about making everything heavier than it should be. Every movement costs more time. Every decision costs more lives. Every operation costs more attention than the last. Evacuation was perfect for that. The moment a unit takes casualties, behavior changes in ways that are almost impossible to hide. Urgency appears, coordination spikes, movement becomes directional. Even disciplined units fall into patterns because the wounded have to move. Russian forces learned to exploit those patterns long before FPVs dominated the war. Routes get mapped, timings get learned, recovery movements get predicted, then drones layered over it, and the pressure sharpened. Surveillance doesn't need to win battles. It only needs to watch long enough to learn what rescue looks like. FPV teams don't have to hunt randomly. They can wait for the moment when you have no choice but to expose yourself again. This is what made the evacuation phase so dangerous. Ukraine could survive the first hit. What killed people was the second act. The ambulance arriving, the stretcher team moving, the vehicle pausing in the wrong place for the wrong amount of time, the cluster forming around a casualty. That's when the sky punishes you. And the damage wasn't just physical. When evacuation becomes lethal, the tempo of war changes. Units hesitate before moving. Commanders delay pushes. Soldiers slow down not because they fear what's ahead, but because they know what happens if someone gets hit and extraction fails. That's attrition at the psychological level. By 2024 and 2025, Russia layered this pressure with FPVs and persistent observation. The battlefield became a place where contact didn't end the danger. Contact became the beginning of the hunting phase. Ukraine tried to blunt it using the tools armies normally reach for. Better protection, smarter movement discipline, smoke, route variation, electronic warfare, night movement. All of it helped at the edges. None of it changed the core reality. Evacuation still meant humans moving into the danger zone. Humans still created signals. Signals still got exploited. And once that clicked, the problem stopped being tactical. It became conceptual. To understand why evacuation drones matter, you have to understand why Russia was so good at exploiting evacuation in the first place. Russia doesn't need you to collapse. It needs you to feel that survival is random and unavoidable. That's why FPVs became so effective. They don't need to destroy entire units. They only need to kill one person at a time, often suddenly, often with little warning at moments when you can't fully control what happens next. The battlefield slows. Fear does the rest. Evacuation was the perfect amplifier for that fear. When evacuation is dangerous, casualties become heavier than they should be. Not only because of the initial wound, but because of the cost of trying to recover the wounded. Every rescue attempt risks producing more casualties. Every decision to extract becomes another moment of exposure. Over time, that creates a subtle but brutal effect. Units begin to move like they're being hunted even when they aren't under direct fire. Russia understood that. It didn't need decisive victories. It needed repeated leverage. Evacuation produced that leverage because it is one of the most predictable moments in war. Even when a unit changes routes, the problem isn't the exact road. The problem is the behavior. A casualty triggers urgency. Urgency triggers movement. Movement triggers visibility. Visibility triggers drones. Ukraine learned this the hard way. Armored ambulances helped, but they were still visible vehicles. Jamming helped, but it wasn't consistent everywhere and it wasn't permanent. Smoke helped, but it bought seconds, not safety. Night helped until thermal and low-light observation erased the advantage. Every solution still required humans to enter the same exposed moment. And in war, the moment you accept a moment is inevitable, your enemy builds around it. Ukraine's breakthrough wasn't technological at first. It was a question. What if evacuation didn't require humans to move into that exposed phase at all? At first, it sounds impossible because armies treat evacuation as a human problem solved by human courage. Ukraine started treating it as an engineering problem. Not to replace medics, not to automate care, not to pretend machines can do everything, just to remove the human signature from the rescue phase. And that is where the shift begins. The first versions of this idea weren't impressive. They weren't elegant. They weren't standardized. They looked like survival tools because that's what they were. Modified ground platforms, remote-controlled carts, commercial systems pushed far past what they were designed to do. Nothing about it looked like a breakthrough weapon. But what mattered wasn't appearance. It was behavior. Human evacuation creates a disturbance on the battlefield. You can see it from above even if you can't see the casualty. A vehicle stops where it shouldn't. A cluster forms, radio chatter spikes, movement becomes directional, urgency becomes visible. Ground evacuation drones don't behave like that. They move the way the battlefield already moves. Slow, low, minimal profile. They don't trigger the same obvious cues that scream opportunity to an operator watching from above. That matters because Russian drone operators are trained to hunt behavior. They look for patterns for the second act, for the movement that follows the first strike. Evacuation drones interrupt that second act. Casualties still happen. The battlefield is still brutal, but the predictable follow-up moment becomes harder to capture. The window collapses, and this is where the change becomes strategic. This does not need perfect reliability to matter. Evacuation drones don't need to work every time. They only need to work often enough to change expectations. Once Russian units can't assume a casualty automatically triggers visible movement, one of their strongest pressure levers weakens. Over time, behavior shifts on both sides. Units gain flexibility. Commanders reposition without fearing that every casualty becomes a second slaughter. Medics survive longer, which preserves unit cohesion and confidence. Evacuation stops being a guaranteed multiplier of losses. That's when a niche tool becomes a doctrinal crack. And once it becomes serial production, it becomes a pattern. Once something becomes a pattern on a battlefield, other militaries start asking uncomfortable questions. From the outside, evacuation drones can look like a narrow battlefield adaptation. That's not how professional militaries see it. Western doctrine treated casualty evacuation as difficult but manageable. The assumption was that if you can secure corridors, control airspace enough, and coordinate movement, evacuation is mostly a problem of timing and protection. Ukraine shattered that assumption. This battlefield stays transparent even when it appears quiet. FPVs don't need air dominance. They need observation and patience. They don't need to own the sky. They only need to catch the moment humans act predictably. Evacuation was the moment doctrine treated as unavoidable exposure. Ukraine found a way to shrink that exposure without controlling the sky. That's what NATO is studying. Because in any near-peer conflict, the environment will resemble Ukraine far more than the war's most Western forces were optimized for. Drones will be dense, sensors will be everywhere, rear areas will be less safe. The human moments of war will be hunted. And when evacuation fails in that environment, morale follows. What Ukraine demonstrated is that you can redesign the problem rather than trying to restore old assumptions. Instead of building heavier ambulances and hoping corridors remain safe, you reduce the exposure window so drastically that the attacker loses their easiest follow-on opportunity. That is uncomfortable for large militaries because it suggests the next disruptive shift will not arrive as a billion-dollar procurement cycle. It will arrive as something tested under fire, adopted quietly, and then standardized because it works. The innovation flow flips. Doctrine doesn't shape technology. Survival forces technology to rewrite doctrine. That's why NATO is watching. Not because evacuation drones win wars alone, but because they remove one of the oldest killing opportunities in war, and they do it with logic that scales. And once that logic spreads, drone dominance stops being purely about killing and purely psychological. It becomes expensive to maintain. At first glance, Russia's answer sounds simple. If evacuation drones reduce exploitation opportunities, then increase drone presence. If windows shrink, blanket the sky harder. If unpredictability grows, overwhelm it with volume. That instinct fits Russia's broader drone doctrine. Scale compensates for precision, quantity substitutes for control. But that logic only works when the battlefield still produces moments worth exploiting. Evacuation drones quietly undermine that assumption. FPV drones are effective because they force a commitment decision. An operator waits, identifies a target, and commits to an attack that cannot be undone. That model depends on the target remaining exposed long enough for the decision to pay off. Human evacuation creates exactly that condition. People gather, movement slows, patterns repeat, time stretches just enough for pressure to convert into damage. Evacuation drones compress that sequence. What used to be a prolonged, observable process becomes a shorter interaction that can be missed even by persistent surveillance. The opportunity doesn't disappear entirely, but it becomes harder to catch in real time and harder to exploit consistently. That shift matters because Russia's drone strategy is not built around occasional success. It is built around reliable follow-on effects. To compensate, Russia has options, but none are clean. Expanding saturation sounds efficient until you look at what it actually requires. Persistent coverage demands far more than airframes. It consumes trained operators, coordination, bandwidth, and time on station. When drones must remain airborne constantly rather than reactively, fatigue and error rise. A system that looks cheap per unit stops being cheap when it has to be everywhere all the time. Redesigning FPVs to loiter longer introduces a different set of trade-offs. Longer endurance means heavier platforms, more complex control systems, and higher costs. These drones also become easier to counter the longer they stay exposed, and the economics drift away from the advantage that made them attractive in the first place. Targeting evacuation drones directly also fails to restore the original leverage. Even when intercepted, the operational return is limited. Destroying an evacuation drone does not necessarily multiply casualties or generate follow-on exposure. It removes a tool, not a moment. Most importantly, none of these responses restore predictability. Russia's advantage was never absolute dominance of the air. It was the ability to anticipate behavior. Casualties triggered patterns. Patterns created windows. Windows created leverage. Once evacuation stops reliably producing those windows, the pressure cycle weakens. That forces Russia into a reactive posture. Instead of deciding where pressure will matter most, it has to chase adaptation. It has to allocate more effort to achieve the same effect. It has to accept that some wounded soldiers will be recovered without consequence. Over time, that erodes efficiency. And modern wars are won and lost on efficiency. Small survivals compound. Units that evacuate cleanly retain cohesion. Commanders who don't lose medics or rescue teams take more initiative. Wounded soldiers who return feed experience back into the force. None of this shows up dramatically on a map, but over months it reshapes tempo. Ukraine does not need evacuation drones to dominate the battlefield. It only needs them to work often enough that casualties stop being exploitable as a planning assumption. That is the real disruption. Russia is no longer fighting a system it can model cleanly. It is fighting uncertainty that resists scale. Every additional layer added to compensate raises cost, complexity, and friction faster than it restores leverage. And friction is deadly to strategies built on pressure. This is why Russia cannot simply drone its way out of the problem. Not because drones stop working, but because the battlefield stops behaving the way the doctrine expects. And when expectations break, advantage follows. This story was never really about evacuation drones. Those machines are just the surface detail. What matters is the shift underneath them. The way modern battlefields now punish visibility more than they reward strength. For most of military history, armies accepted that certain moments would always be dangerous. Assaults, breakthroughs, withdrawals, especially evacuation. You planned around those risks, but you never believed you could remove them. Exposure was treated as the unavoidable price of action. Ukraine is challenging that assumption, not by overpowering the battlefield, not by dominating the air, but by redesigning how long exposure exists at all. That is a fundamental change. In any future war between capable states, the environment will look far closer to Ukraine than to anything Western militaries planned around over the last 20 years. Sensors will be cheap, drones will be everywhere, observation will be continuous. The line between front and rear will blur almost immediately. In that environment, casualty evacuation is one of the first systems to fail. When helicopters can't fly freely, when armored vehicles draw instant attention, when every predictable movement is tracked, the traditional logic collapses. Ukraine didn't wait for those conditions to improve. It accepted them as permanent and adapted around them. Instead of asking how to protect evacuation, it asked how to make evacuation stop advertising itself. That reframing is what makes this dangerous for every army watching, because it suggests survivability in future wars won't come primarily from thicker armor, better suppression, or faster response. It will come from shrinking the window in which the enemy can react at all. Seconds matter more than dominance. Absence matters more than presence. Silence matters more than firepower. This is why NATO isn't watching this as a curiosity. If evacuation can be redesigned to function under constant observation, then other assumed vulnerabilities come into question too. Resupply, rotation, repair, command movement, all the moments that modern doctrine still treats as risky but necessary. Ukraine is demonstrating that some of those risks are not laws of war. They are habits of war, and habits can be broken. What makes this uncomfortable for large militaries is not the technology, it's the origin. This didn't come from a multi-year procurement program. It didn't come from a doctrine rewrite or a strategic concept document. It came from urgency. Ukraine didn't build evacuation drones to change warfare theory. It built them to survive tomorrow. But in doing so, it exposed something deeper. Modern wars are no longer decided by who controls the battlefield the longest. They are decided by who remains exposed for the shortest amount of time. And once that logic takes hold, everything else has to adapt around it. That shift isn't coming. It's already here.